Mirasee.
Hi, I'm Matthew Turner, and you're listening to Making It. I am the VP of Operations at Mirasee, and we help coaches and consultants and thought leaders make it. Hindsight's a beautiful entity, isn't it? You look back and you're able to appreciate things you never did at the time. All the way back at school, when I was 14, 15, 16, I built a story in my head that I wasn't good at stories. I wasn't good at reading. I wasn't good at spelling. So therefore, I did not enjoy things like English because I had struggled with my speech in my younger years. So grammar and speaking was always something that was of difficulty. And over the years, I just learned to navigate that. But it just reinforced this story all the time of, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this. And therefore, I built this narrative of, I don't enjoy it. So when it came to writing and reading, it was not for me. But I'm able to look back now, and so much of my career has been based around storytelling. I've written books and I've created stories, written fiction, nonfiction, everything. It got me into, I suppose, the business world because I started ghostwriting for others. But even as I've gone down other paths in my career and now more leadership, doing operations, I'm still always pulled back to this notion of narrative, this idea of how can I best tell a story? Are you trying to create buy-in with your team? It's about giving them some kind of destination that feels relatable and that they're curious to learn more about, and then building a path towards that. If you can create buy-in through story, you've knocked down so many of the obstacles that no doubt will enter the scene. So I found it interesting because as a young kid, even as a young adult, I did not assume I was good at any of this. But once I entered my 20s, I started to turn to writing as a form of therapy and expression. And then as I entered my 30s, I was able to look back on life and realize, actually, I've always been quite a vivacious storyteller. I've always enjoyed stories, not always through reading, not always through writing, but I was always building these stories in my head. My imagination was wild. It was going down twists and turns. So I guess it was in my early 30s when I was able to look back 15 years prior and finally appreciate that. I was always a storyteller. And that was eye-opening because as I entered my 30s and I started to delve deeper into trying to run my own business, I realized the importance of not only the narrative you're telling others, but the narrative you're telling yourself. There was no entrepreneurial upbringing or even creative upbringing. Neither of my parents were what I would call creative in any real meaningful sense. Not writers, not artists, not musicians, not even huge readers. I'd enjoy a book around a pool on holiday, but that was by and large it. I had a good upbringing, given a solid foundation. But yeah, when I think about who I am today and the kind of work that I do and how I was drawn towards writing and expressing stories, there's no direct lineage back to my parents or my upbringing in those early years into young adult. I guess I just always had this desire for more. And one of the big fears I've always had is to look back with regret, wishing I'd done certain things, wishing I'd taken certain chances. That's always scared me. I just did not want to be an old man who'd wish he'd written books. So I decided to be a young man who was writing them, and let's see how it goes. It was when I was studying around 16, 17, and I got all my results. I got an A in language and a C in literature. I just could not believe I got an A in English because I'd built this story of I'm not good at it. But as I went deeper down my journey and started to realize about writing and creating stories, I was like, all along, I was a storyteller. So that was a big moment I look back on where I'm able to appreciate how things could have gone very differently had I got a different grade. But it was a foundational piece to my eventual puzzle. Let's try and figure out who Matthew Turner can become. Because if I just, wish and desire and say I'll get to it one day, chances are I'll be an old man who looks back with nothing but what ifs. I've always had this desire to be more, to be someone who, the kind of person that I would admire to be. So I've always had this push of being exceptional, whether I'm exceptional at something or not. So I think that was in part, not necessarily a tipping point, but there was always a desire there for more. And I certainly glorified entrepreneurs. They were inventors and visionaries and just some of the best of us. And as I started working for clients and going deeper into my career, I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I was surrounded by people who inspired me. I finished grad school, got my master's in advertising and marketing, and I got a job on the other side of it, a couple of jobs as marketing manager. And I just hated how I was having to fit into other people's rules and roles. Looking back, I can appreciate there was a lot of young naivety and ego and stubbornness. And I'd certainly give my younger self some harsh words and advice. I could see myself just going through the motions. I wanted to really feel something with my work. I was never someone who just got a lot of value from checking in, picking up a paycheck. And I was worried that I'd be doing that for a year. And a year would become 2, 2 would become 5. Before I'd know it, I'd be 40 or 45 or 50. And I've just had a career of like just going through the motions. I might have been climbing the ladder, but to what avail? That was the ultimate tipping point. I realized I wasn't a particularly good worker. It wasn't something that was igniting me. I basically had a role that was about to change. And it was like, okay, I can find another job like this. I can stay in this current role and it will be something that I don't enjoy. Or do I take this opportunity to branch out and take a risk? In one sense, it was not the best thing to do. I could have gone about it much better. But it was also the thing that sparked my path, my journey. And I learned so much and I met so many amazing people. And yeah, I've absolutely got no regrets of that decision. That was a big tipping point moment. I don't think there was ever one point per se where I felt like I was about to break. I'm certainly not one of these people who has that like million in the red kind of story where I was, a few degrees away from giving up or being bankrupt. But there was certainly a long trudging, wandering in the wilderness where I just didn't quite know what I was supposed to be doing. I didn't quite know whether I should be this or that. It certainly warped my sense of success because I ended up not really delving deep into like what success means to me. I just subscribed to a lot of vanilla versions, a lot of aspects where, it's money or it's fame or it's a certain audience size and a lot of the vanity metrics now, which I look back on it, it's like it's just a waste of time. It's one thing to be inspired by others, but it's another to closely aspire to be someone. I think I spent a long time trying to be someone else, aspiring to be this entrepreneur, this other entrepreneur, rather than just taking inspiration for them. And that kept me in the wilderness and trudging along and doing work that was just, I don't know, to an extent disingenuine because I was just trying to tick boxes and chase shadows and distracted by shiny objects. Thankfully, I began to better understand what success meant to me. Just took a little time to get there. I think one of the most important things we can ask ourselves, and this is true not just for people trying to make it as entrepreneurs, but people trying to make it as employees or self-employed contractor, whatever title you want to give yourself, is what does success mean to you right now in this current chapter of your life? And if you don't like the word success, replace it with meaning or purpose or impact or making it. And it's not the all-encompassing, set in stone, this is how you're going to feel forever and a day. But like right now, this current chapter of your life, where you are the next 2, 3, 5 years, what does it look like? And get as clear on it as possible. It'll set you in good stead. I've certainly been one of these complex individuals who seems to sit on the fence between being a very sort of logical and rational person and a creative. It's difficult to write, but certainly ones of fiction without having a good degree of imagination and creativity. But I am also very routine oriented and I love rituals and I subscribe to habits. And for me, life is just one big system, made up of different processes, and you go through them, and it's easier to embark on the journey ahead when you're able to subscribe to certain processes and systems. So I've always had this conflict within where part of me wants to be creative and a part of me doesn't. And I've certainly found it harder in the past. And I think I found it easier today because I'm more appreciative like who I am and accepting of who I am, and have learned to navigate who I am in a way where I'm able to double down on my strengths and look to plug in those gaps. But yeah, it's not been easy. I'll use, I guess, the analogy of writing a book. Some people go into writing a book with a wishy-washy idea of the stories in their mind, and that's enough. They approach each day and write what they need to write. And one day they might be chapter 11, the next day chapter 2, and then chapter 27. It's like this weird painting that slowly but surely comes together. They need that mess in order to bring it together. That's never been me. I would have a solid structure in my mind. I would understand the beginning, the middle, the end, the different phases and story arcs before writing a book. I would even have a very good idea of the chapters and in what order and roughly what each chapter or scene would be. And then I would just try to let go and trust that, okay, I've built the framework. The skeleton is there. Let's have a little bit of fun. Let's just see what happens as I dive in. I needed to go chronologically because that's just how my brain works. So I would start at the beginning and I would go through the end. And I would just trust that this framework would guide me and direct me, but I'd not got so detailed in it that it would dictate me. And it's a little bit like building the spaceship and you have no idea what the spaceship is going to look like. So you build the framework. You find the pieces that are going to allow that spaceship to be firm and strong. It needs to be structurally sound. Otherwise, as you start adding pieces to it, and it gets to a certain size, it'll break. And that's, I guess, how I would approach the book. And in many ways, just life in general. It's like trying to put structure around what I do, trying to put structure and routine around my life and everything within it. So I feel somewhat grounded and I feel like I can trust the process that I'm on, and then force myself to just let go of the details. The process is going to direct me, but it's not there to dictate me. I think we see it in business a lot as well. A lot of people who start businesses, they're visionaries. So it's good to get things started and they build momentum and it feels fun and good. And then it gets to a point where it needs to build up. And because there's not those foundations there, the structure, those core pieces, as they start to build it up and scale, it's just wibbly wobbly almost instantly. So they went from 0 to 50K effortlessly, but then trying to get from 50K to 100K, like the hardest thing in the world. And it is a delicate balance because if you try to put too much structuring too soon, you're robbing yourself of that creativity. It can be too rigid. It's not allowing that invention. So it is a very fine line where, in my opinion at least, there should be a plot or some structure around it to stop you going down just random paths and just chasing shiny objects, but leaving enough room for that creativity and innovation to shine. And I think that's true whether you're writing a book, building a business, whatever the entity may be. To me, the definition of making it is to have a definition of what it means to you as an individual. I wrote a book quite some years ago. I think we're coming up to the 10-year anniversary, called The Successful Mistake. I interviewed 100 plus people for that book. Entrepreneurs of various different walks and lives and success stories, people who were way in front of me, people who were behind me, just all of it. Learned a great deal about mistakes and failure and adversity and overcoming and building resilience and persistence, among many other things. But one of the biggest lessons I learned was this notion of defining success, what it means to make it. There's failure stories of going $1 million in the red or being close to bankruptcy or damaging their relationship, people just going to the brink of the end. They look back and so much of it was shrouded in this pursuit of success. But it was someone else's version of success, whether it was a vanity metric or they were just trying to subscribe to something instilled on them by their parents or the media, some kind of professor or school teacher. They had a chip on their shoulder. They were just trying to prove others wrong, maybe even deep down just tried to prove their own demons wrong. And then they were able to build up from that failure when you've got nowhere to go other than up. And in doing so, time and time again, I heard people talk about how they began to appreciate what success really meant to them, what they actually wanted, what sort of impact they wanted to have on life and what sort of impact they wanted their life to have on them. And that would just change the rule book for them practically overnight. They would have just a greater sense of perspective and appreciation and purpose. It wouldn't result in riches and miracles, but it would give him a sense of, where am I heading? What is that North Star? And what is that compass? So that was big for me. For me, learning back through the eyes of others and through the stories of others, it forced me to question, what am I doing? What do I want? What is it that I want 40-year-old or 50-year-old or 60-year-old Matthew to be? What sort of impact do I want him to have? And so I realized that a lot of the things that I was pursuing, it wouldn't make me happy or content or even remotely satisfied. So I began to make some tweaks and found some of the answers I needed. I let go of certain old habits and beliefs, and I replaced them with new ones, and I began to subscribe to a different version of awareness and appreciation. I certainly started heading in the right direction, but there were times when I would veer off course, and I have a greater sense of appreciation to all that today, because I've got a greater sense of who it is that I am, my strengths, my gaps, what I want to become, what I need to work upon. But if you speak to Matthew, who's 50, he'll look back and go, that 40-year-old version had more of the answers, but still was missing many. It brings us back to that question of defining, making it. It's learning, it's growing, it's appreciating. At any given point, you only know what you know. You've got to try to keep putting certain markers on your journey to stop and reflect and look around and question, is this what I want? Am I giving my all? Am I doing what I need to be doing? Am I heading towards my North Star, or have I veered off course? Is that North Star still one that makes sense to me, or do I need to make adjustments? And I think life's an evolution like that. And the sooner you subscribe to it and appreciate that at any given time, your version of truth and that vision is only what it is right now, but it will change, but it will evolve. It makes giving yourself into the journey ahead a little bit easier. And don't know what future Matthew will become. I don't know, if I'll look back as a 70-year-old and be like, yeah, I made it. But if I keep subscribing to that journey, that growth, that evolution, then I'll hopefully come somewhere close. I can probably somewhat relate to, just purely as a human, the rise of Anakin Skywalker, which probably makes me sound absolutely psychotic because he's very much a bad guy. But if anything, he's just one of the most human people in the entire universe. He's this little kid destined for greatness, apparently, the chosen one, all this responsibility thrust upon him, and became, a Jedi, started learning the ways. And anyone who sees the prequels will see this kind of really angsty individual who, you can see it coming, but this guy is not the typical Jedi. He's being drawn to the dark side. He's too at the mercy of his emotions and feelings. I think most people can relate to that, especially in your younger years. And I say younger years, going all the way up until your 30s. And that's when a lot of us start to really mature enough, because we've experienced a bit of life. And who knows what would have come of Anakin? Was he destined to become Darth Vader? Was he destined to become the savior of the Jedi Empire and bring peace and balance to the Force? Well, a thing happened and he got manipulated by an even worse guy. He lost the love of his life, and bit by bit, he became corrupted. And I don't think anyone's really immune to that, or should I say very few people are immune to that. There are objectively good people in the world who are just destined to do good things. They are, to an extent, incorruptible for one reason or another. And then there are evil people in the world who are just objectively evil and bad. But they just represent the 2 or 3% on either side. And then the rest of us in the middle, making up 90+%, we're just complex. We could become really good. We could become really bad. We can sway along that spectrum depending on the chapter of life that we are. And it just takes 1 or 2 pieces for you to maybe just lose it and slip towards the dark side, as the saying goes. So I certainly relate to Anakin's story because it just made him feel so epically human. If we can't relate to that, who can we? I certainly hope I don't become a reincarnation of Darth Vader. That is not my life goal, but I can relate to his unraveling. I'm Matthew Turner, and you've been listening to Making It. You can find me at Mirasee.com. That's Mirasee.com. brew.com. You'll find that link in the show notes, as well as a free revenue leak audit strategy call. So one of our experts can help you make it too. If you'd like that, go to the show notes page.
Making It is part of the Mirasee FM podcast network, which also includes such shows as To Lead is Human and Neuroscience of Coaching. To catch the great episodes on Making It, please follow us on Mirasee FM's YouTube channel or your favorite podcast player. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a comment or a starred review. It is the best way to help us get these ideas to more people.